Hey book buddies, Katie here, and today I'm going to be reviewing The Language of Thorns, Midnight Tales and Dangerous Magic by Leigh Bardugo. Yeah! Yes, I'm wearing the same outfit that I was in the last video. That's because they were filmed on the same day. Same cup of tea, too. So, The Language of Thorns. I am on a Leigh Bardugo kick. As I'm sure you guys have noticed by now, I love her. And so this is her book of short stories that's set in the Grishaverse, which is the same universe that Six of Crows, the duology, and her Shadow and Bone trilogy are set in. And this is a book of fairy tales. And what I really like about them is that in the Grishaverse, she's created several different countries. She's built an entire world. And each of these fairy tales comes from a different country. And so if you read any of her other books, it's kind of cool to see how those cultures affect the stories that you're reading. Now that's not to say that you can't read this book if you haven't read any of her other novels, because you totally can. They're just like fairy tales. The first thing that I want to note about this book of short stories are the illustrations, because they're glorious. So as you progress through the story, the illustrations do as well. And if that's not the coolest thing you've ever seen, I don't know what your definition of cool is. And then at the end of every story, you get a big illustration, and they are so pretty. The colors are gorgeous. The illustrations in and of themselves are gorgeous. The artwork in this book was done by Sarah Kippen, and she's super talented. And the fact that these stories are so beautifully illustrated adds a lot to the reading experience, because the writing, if you are familiar with Leigh Bardugo's writing, is so beautiful and poetic and lush and flowery and sensory that when you have such beautiful illustrations paired with the stories, it's like your mind is there. You are in the fairy tale. You're ready to go. I dreamed about these. And when a book makes you dream about it, you know that it's a good book. Now the other thing that I really dig about these short stories is that she has put a twist in all of these fairy tales. So each of the fairy tales in this book has a little hint of familiarity to a fairy tale that we have. Like, there's one that's kind of a retelling of the Nutcracker. There's one that's almost a prequel to The Little Mermaid. There's a Hansel and Gretel one. But she takes these stories that we're super familiar with and she just completely flips them on their head, gives it a twist. You're not expecting what's coming, and I love it because I got the Target version of this, and that has a little letter at the front. And in this letter, she talks about how when she was growing up, she really loved fairy tales, but sometimes they would bother her because they would feel incomplete or unnatural in some sort of way. Not magically unnatural, but just they would leave her asking questions that weren't ever answered. So for example, what kind of parents would send their children into the woods to go deliver food to their grandma and not go with them or go themselves? Or if a man completes a bunch of really weird tasks, does that make him a good person? Does that mean he's going to be a good husband? Or is he just really good at weird tasks? And each of these stories answers those questions. And each of these stories feels right. And each of them have a twist, and sometimes the twists are so shocking. I gasped out loud several times while I was reading these fairy tales, and my family was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "No." So the first one is called Ayama in the Thornwood, and this one seems like it's kind of a mashup of sort of like a Beauty and the Beast type thing, and the Minotaur in the Labyrinth from Greek mythology. I think it's Greek, maybe it's Roman. And I think there's also another fairy tale that she's pulled into this one, but it's a fairy tale that I'm not familiar with. And in her world, this story is Zamini. So it's kind of cool because she uses the term Zawa instead of Grisha, and you know that that means witch. And this is the story of a little girl who's much uglier than her sister, and the kingdom that she lives in, the king gave birth to two sons. One is a handsome prince, and the first one is a monster. Kind of a wolf man thing. And so the king put this monster into a maze, and the monster got out. And so now the king and the prince are offering Ayama all of these riches and various rewards if she will go into the woods and reason with this monster so that he stops eating their cows and stuff. And that's all I'm going to tell you about that one. The second story is called The Too Clever Fox, and this is a Ravkin story, and it's about a clever fox And one day there's a hunter, and the fox tries to outsmart him. And that's all I'm going to tell you about that one. It's hard for me to summarize these without giving away plot twists, and I'm not going to give away plot twists because they're amazing. The third story is also Ravkan, and it's called The Witch of Dupa, and this one is a retelling of Hansel and Gretel. Now, this one's really, really, really good, but I am going to warn that there are a few triggers in it. So, sexual assault is implied. It's not overt, it's symbolic, but it's enough where you can pick up on it. So it's not directly saying a sexual assault is occurring, but you kind of get the gist. And I know that that can be really triggering for some readers, so I just want to warn you that that is in the story. But the twist on this one was like, it was so good. It was really disturbing, but in a really good way. And it's probably one of my favorite stories in this one. So yeah. The fourth story is also Ravkan, and it's called Little Knife, and I'm not sure what fairy tales this one pulls from, or if it's just its own thing, but it's about Grisha Tidemaker and his friend, the River, and he's competing against the rest of the men in the kingdom to win the heart of this beautiful princess. And that's all I'm gonna say about that one. But I will say that the ending of that one, I was like, yes. The fifth story is Kirch, and it's called The Soldier Prince, and it's a retelling of the Nutcracker. It also has some hints of the Velveteen Rabbit in it, and also kind of Pinocchio. This is one that I also really enjoyed, and it also made me really sad. But the end isn't sad, so it's got a happy ending. But it was one that I sat there and I was like, oh. And the last story is called When the Water Sang Fire, and it's a Fjerdan story, and it's the longest one in this book. And it's not necessarily a retelling of The Little Mermaid, but you can tell that it got its kind of inspiration from that kind of style. And that's about this mermaid who doesn't fit in with all the other mermaids because she looks a little different, and so they're all super mean to her. But she is really, really awesome at singing, and in this world, singing is not just for luring sailors to their death, but it's also how they perform magic, and how they create things around them, and how they defend themselves. And then she makes friends with another mermaid, and then through a series of events, they go to the land, and they grow legs. And that's all I'm going to tell you about that one. But the ending was like, whew, it made me shiver. And when you get to the ending, you'll see why I say that it feels kind of like a prequel to The Little Mermaid, because you're like, So overall, I'm giving this book of short stories 5 stars because it was beautiful. Also, side note, there are so many standout lines in this book that I don't like to mark on books that are really pretty. Sometimes I'll mark on my older books, but this one's too pretty to mark in. But there were so many lines that I was like, ooh, I want to highlight that. I want to tattoo that on my body. I'm not going to, but like, I considered it. But yeah, anyway, that concludes this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up or subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'll be back again very soon with a new video, but until then, happy reading. Bye.